welcome back. So very glad you could join us today. You know, in past shows, I've asked you to drop me a line and tell me what you want to see on these shows. One of the things that everyone has dropped me a line and told me they wanted to see was someone doing portraits. So I brought a young lady all the way from California to show you one of the most fantastic ways of doing portraits you've ever seen. And I'd like to welcome today Ferne Sirois. Ferne, glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Bob.
I'm going to sneak right off the set here, let Ferne have it, and I'll see you at the end of the show.
Let's begin by talking about what you paint a portrait on. It's usually a smooth surface, and I've chosen a masonite board. I've prepared it with gesso, and I've worked up a sketch and transferred it on with a transfer paper called graphite. Then I sealed it, and I've buttered it up with my medium, meaning I've painted the medium on it. And the medium is Damar varnish, linseed oil, and turpentine. I'm going to use an 1.5 inch sash brush. Let's go to the palette and I'll mix up the first color. The first color that I'm going to use is burnt sienna, Indian yellow, and cadmium red light, because today we're going to paint a little baby Indian. Okay, now with this great big brush, just paint all the way across the face. And because the paints that I'm using are really very thin and the medium's already on the board, the paint comes off in a very transparent manner so that you can see the drawing right through. You never lose your drawing this way. And you get a lovely skin tone. Okay, this is a nice color to also use in the background. So I'm going to handle the background with this, and I'm just going to let the brush dance to and fro over the board. See how the paint just glides on? This is really such an easy way to get a quick portrait without a lot of effort. Now this can be smoothed down, but at first it's going to look a little streaky, but that's all right. It gives it a little character to have some brushwork in there. And so we're going to get a nice impression. I'm going to vignette, and that means to just cameo the portrait, and the rest of the painting will be very vague and sort of soft and diffused in the background. That's good because the center of interest is really the little face. So we don't want to confuse anyone by putting too much in the background with a portrait. I'm going to darken the corners, and I picked up a little burnt umber. Okay, if you're getting streaks that go in one particular direction, the way to handle that, if you want it to be nice and smooth, is to brush against the grain, brush in the opposite direction. And that would smooth it out. Okay, we've got a background going here. And it doesn't take long at all to really develop an interesting background. You can get all sorts of subtleties in your brushwork here just by changing the direction and brushing to and fro, making basket weave strokes in and out, crisscrossing them. The main thing is to keep it interesting. Don't let it become monotonous. You don't want a starburst around your face. Now this color is very good for the costume color, which will be a buckskin. So I'm just cleaning out my brush on it, and you notice it seems to get lighter as you come in towards the face, and that will help set the face off. I want to keep this color really out of the hair as much as possible because there's Indian yellow in it. When I go to paint that hair black, Indian yellow and black, or Payne's gray, will make a green. So it's a good idea to keep those colors separated in painting. Well, we're almost finished with the background, and wasn't that easy? Of course, that entire area can really be softened up with a nice little blending brush, which I call a bunny brush. It's really soft, soft hair. It's almost like rabbit hair. And a lot of painters use this for blending all sorts of things, but particularly this is really good on faces. So I'm going to blend down all the brush strokes that might show up in my little face. And I'm going to get to work on the details of the face. Now, the first additional color that I'm going to use on the face will be Cadmium Red Light. And let's move to the palette and I'll show you how I load my brush. I'm dipping a short sable flat here, about a number 18, and I'm going to wipe it off on the palette so that I have a rather dry brush. I don't want gobs of color on the brush here because they're going to be too thick. This needs to be a little bit on the transparent side. So I'm going to stroke it in onto the painting about midway along the cheek, from the temple to the mouth. I'll load my brush again and I'll do the other cheek. Okay, and while I'm painting the cheek, I'll paint the lips because the lips will be approximately the same color. And since I have some red on my brush already, I may as well develop some of the headband. I always like to paint as many places that call for the same color at one time as possible. I think that helps the painting to come up like a negative and develop pretty much at the same time. I'm looking for another area that I might paint red here, and perhaps a little beadwork down here to match his headband. This is going to be a little Indian boy. We'll call him Little One Feather. Okay, the next color that I'm going to use will be white. I'm going to develop the highlights, and I'm just going to load my brush with a pure white. And I'm going to paint it right on to the surface of the face. You have to be careful about overloading the brush, which is something that can happen. In this particular instance, I got a little more paint than I actually wanted, so I'm dipping my brush into the paint and using it like an inkwell to spread it elsewhere on the face. Right now, I'm just painting the highlights, approximately where they're going to go, and then I'm going to blend them. And I have a really interesting technique for blending. I think that you're really going to like that. But see how as I strike the lights, they pick up the color from underneath. And as long as I have some white on the brush, I may as well highlight other areas. For instance, the lip, and maybe a little highlight on the chin. All right, I'm going to let that set for a minute, and then I'll show you my blending technique. But I think this is a good time to let the paint rest, and I'm going to show you how to paint eyes. Eyes are really very easy, and so are faces if you know how to paint them. I'll clean my brush, and I'm going to prepare to do the eyes. And I'm going to use a little liner brush. A number 1 or a number 2 is a good size for details such as eyes. I'm going to mix up, I'm going to the palette now, and I'm going to mix up some burnt umber and some ivory black. Now I want to make sure that the brush is not overloaded, so I'm rolling the brush and I'm wiping it off on the palette before I begin to paint. Now if you've got your drawing on there just the way you want it, there shouldn't be any problem in painting the eyes. But you can make a few adjustments as you paint. And the technique in painting the eye is that you, especially when working with children, is you want to paint the top eyelid first on both eyes. So I'm going to paint the top eyelid, and I'm using little quick short strokes rather than one even line. This way it'll resemble eyelashes. Little short strokes, and remember that eyes are really the important part of the painting to most people. Most people look into the eyes of a portrait, they want to see a lot in there, so this is an important part of the painting, and you want to make it just as lovely as you possibly can. So take your time with the eyes. Okay, we've got the top eyelid painted. That's the rim of the eyelid. Now I want to paint the pupil. So I'm going to paint the pupil, and I've loaded up my brush with the same color that I used for the eyelid liner or the lashes. And I'm going to paint the entire pupil in a solid mix of ivory black and burnt umber. Nice and easy. Can you see those eyes begin to appear? Now baby's eyes are really a little wider and usually larger than adult eyes in compared to the rest of the face. Now these eyes need a little sparkle, need to be livened up, so I'm going to add some sparkle. I'm going to dip my brush into some pure cadmium red light. Now combined with the dark that I've painted in there, it should make those eyes sparkle beautifully and pick up some of the reflected light from the skin and clothing. And here's a little bit of painter's grammar. You use a comma on the right and a period on the left, or a comma on the left and a period on the right, depending on the light source. And usually the comma, the period that is opposite the light source. So the light source here is coming from the right. So I'm going to paint the comma on the right, dipping my brush again, and the period on the left. And a comma on the right, this is for the left eye, and a period on the left. Now you may need to make some adjustment in the pupil area after you've added your accents. So you can go back and readjust that, make sure it's round if you've accidentally squared it up. And of course you know what comes next. That will be the white of the eye. So I'm going to take up a clean brush here and paint the white of the eye. Just loading it up with white paint again, only this time it's going to be a lot thinner so that I'm sure to pick up some of the undercolor. Okay, this is a little curving stroke. Here's a comma, Need a little more paint there. See how it's picking up the undercolor? That's most important because the whites of the eyes should really be very compatible to the skin tone. They should have some of the skin tone in them. Need to roll my brush a little bit and have just a touch too much paint. Okay, now we're ready for the lower eyelid. I'm going back to my palette and I'm picking up that little liner brush and I'm mixing up the same color that I used before. That's burnt umber and ivory black. Wiping my brush off on the palette. And now, ready to paint the lower eyelid. It should be, in comparison to the upper eyelid, thinner and lighter. Remember, thinner and lighter. Okay, a little more touch to the upper eyelid there. And since I have my brush all loaded and ready to go, I think I'll paint eyebrows. Okay, eyebrows are done a lot like eyelashes, little quick short strokes. I'm lifting up at the end of each stroke and it's a flick of the wrist, a flick of the wrist. And if they don't match, it really doesn't matter because most people do not have matching eyebrows anyway. So you're never going to paint exactly the same arch from the left as you get from the right. Don't worry about it. Okay, what do you suppose would be the last and most important detail in the eyes? That's right, it's the highlight. So load up a little brush, a pointed brush, soft sable with white, and get a nice little blob of paint on the end, and don't even try to touch the surface of the canvas or the board. Just touch paint to paint and dot. And if you pick up a little bit of the undercolor, clean the tip of the brush again and dip it again so it's nice fresh paint and dot. Okay, it's time to start blending on some of the highlights on the face. And I have a soft little blender brush here that I like to use. It's good for small places. And I have another bunny brush that's good for big places. So I'm going to try some of the larger areas first. And here's the technique. You pull the highlight out from the edge and blend it over the curve of the face, following the curve of the cheek and down into the red that you painted for the rouge of the face. See what a lovely soft blend of color you get there? Little apple cheeks. Now I seem to have a little extra paint here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push that back up and clean my brush as I go. It's a perfect example of what happens when you have a little too much white there. Of course, I did that deliberately so that you would know what to do in case of an emergency. And now I'm going to blend along the base of the lower eyelid using a smaller brush and out from the top of the highlight. Now the idea is that you want to try to keep as much of the painted highlight unblended in the center as possible so that it stays fresh and clean. Because you have wet paint under there, it's easy to muddy it up if you overblend it. So the idea is a light touch. Don't overblend it. Okay, blending on my lip, blending on my little chin. Now about now you really ought to be able to see a little face emerging. Can you see that face coming out of the board there? Now, I'm up so close I really can't see that, but I'm sure you can. I'm going to add a little touch more red here on the lips. All right, it's time to begin to work on the shadows. We've spent a lot of time really on the lights. Let's work on the shadows. A burnt sienna, using the brush that I had loaded for the eyebrows and eyes, will work just fine. So you don't really need to clean a brush here. And a little burnt sienna, draw a line along the nostril, wing, and I'll redefine the philtrum there. That's a little soup strainer. And I'm going to really define the opening of the mouth here and make a little shadow at each end of the mouth opening to create a little bit of a smile or a little happy expression. We want a happy little Indian. This is a happy painting and a happy little Indian. And up along the upper eyelid. Okay, now it's important when painting very young faces and babies that you be sure not to overwork the darks and not give them too many shadows, because it can age the baby. So I'm going to define the lower jaw now. And it's time to blend that in a little bit, and we'll put the hair on, and we'll soon have a little face here. Okay, my little soft blender brush. This is called a mop sometimes when you use it just for blending, and it's a little round brush. Some painters like to call it a mop. All right, I'm going to move along here and start painting the hair. I'm going to the palette and I'm going to mix up burnt umber and ivory black. And I'm using a great big aquarelle brush. Okay, from the center out and along the shape of the head. We want to follow the form of the head. Okay, give him some little hair hanging down by his face and ear. And a few little wispies sticking out from the headband. And while we're up here, let's paint a feather. In and down, along the chisel of the brush, in and down, in and down. Okay, and I'm going to paint a little vein in the feather. Okay, that's our little Indian boy. He's coming right out here. And, of course, we have to finish up his headband and give him a necklace. And we'll just keep this very vignetted. Okay, a little blue ornament. And a few blue beads. And perhaps a little white to show where the costume comes in. A little stroke of white here will show the edge of a neck of a little buckskin. This is really a little baby, so he has a very short neck. Little ornamentation on his rosette there on the little amulet that hangs down. And here we have a little Indian, painted with ease, no effort, very little mixing, and a whole lot of fun. I hope that you enjoyed that.
Ferne, we'd like to thank you very, very much for being here with us today. On behalf of all of us here, we'd like to wish each and every one of you happy painting. God bless. Hope to see you next week. Bye-bye now.